Oh, wrong screen. Here we go. There we go. All right. Hello, U.S. history friends. We're on to a lecture today. So hopefully you have your notes in front of you. 3 points, and then so what? We're going to talk about democratization, which is basically the expanding of rights and civic participation across more and more people. So again, demos rule the people, democracy rule by the people. This is the spreading of more and more power and participation to more and more Americans. Because as we've made the point in this class several times, the founding fathers were very wary of direct democracy and sought to have more of a republican form of government in which there's representatives who represent the people running the government. But we're always, as a nation, undergoing this process of allowing more and more people access to this government. And that's a period that ushered in by Thomas Jefferson, and then Foley represented in the presidency of Andrew Jackson. So first, though, let's talk about the era that comes in following um, the Federalist period, and that is what we call the era of good feelings. And that begins roughly in 1800 with the election of Thomas Jefferson. And one of the major moments that we've already been spending time on, I won't talk about a lot here, but that's Louisiana land purchase, known as the Noble Bargain from Napoleon of France, trying to just get the port of New Orleans, but ends up with all of the Great Plains, and roughly doubling the size of the country. And so, of course, Lewis and Clark are sent to explore this, and creates a lot more opportunity for America to expand. We've talked a little bit about how it was constitutionally questionable. Jefferson was a kind of a strict constructionist and interpreter of the Constitution, but then when he had the opportunity to do something not clearly outlined in the Constitution, he did changes to it and say, well, maybe it is implied, and went for it. And I think we should, overall could say, you know what, I'm glad he did. And I think it's a good lesson as that. Um, is it better to be strict or open interpretive of the Constitution? Well, maybe a little bit of both. And that was the whole point and the brilliance of the founders, in that at times you're going to need both of those in order to adapt to new situations while also preserving specific historical rights. So Louisiana Purchase really gave the nation a shot in the arm, felt like things were on the move. The other thing that really ushered in this era of good feelings, and actually this is the more official mark of this era that I'm describing, and that is the War of 1812. That is the second war for America's independence that oftentimes gets overlooked between the United States and Great Britain. And it was fought basically over its right to exist. England kind of wanted to, they'd lost control, but they thought maybe they could really keep America hedged in. They wouldn't have to treat them as their equals. They could rule the seas around them, impose upon on their trade, impress their soldiers, maybe erode their frontiers, send Indians in along their western frontier, use Canada to block them to the north. And so that battle, that war between 1812, which we'll be looking at in class, was really America asserting itself to say, no, we are a sovereign nation. We will control our borders. We will have free trade. You will not abuse our soldiers overseas, and you will respect us as a sovereign nation. And the United States winning that war with the help of Andrew Jackson really brings on a new wave of nationalism and pride, and new heroes like Andrew Jackson and William Henry Harrison. And you have here the famous battle of in Baltimore, the Fort McHenry, where of course the Star Spangled Banner was written. The other important thing that emerges from the War of 1812 and this era of good feelings, just move my picture over, is this thing called the Monroe Doctrine. And this was kind of an official declaring of America's right to, as a sovereign nation, and to impose its influence in its own sphere of influence, namely the Western Hemisphere. And it basically was a foreign policy doctrine that said, you know what, Europe, you need to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. You've got your own issues, you and Napoleon. You guys have been fighting on the continent. You've got ancient rivalries that go back millennia. Stay out of here and don't interfere with our processes with Central and South America, and we'll stay out of yours. We're going to reject imperial colonialism. You're not to come over and have major colonies, again, whether it's in the Caribbean or Central America or South America. And it was really this idea of stay out of our hemisphere so that we can have influence, so that we can grow and develop our own policies. Kind of keep your old world to yourself. We want to be able to kind of continue to develop our new world and our new ideals here, as well as, of course, American influence. There was a self-preservationist attitude that, we're a growing power. We want to have influence, and so we want to have that here in our new hemisphere without the old world, butting in. Yeah, they're little America thumbing its nose at Germany and England, saying, stay out. Um, Which then leads us to the next point, and that is the man who has come to represent this new American democratization, or the era of good feelings, and that is Andrew Jackson, which I've titled this section King Andrew the First, as you'll see, because that was what many of his detractors called him because of what he did with the presidency. Some background: he is known as Old Hickory for being a tough young man, and along with a tough old man later in his life. His father died while he was young. He actually was wounded during the Revolutionary War as a young man. I won't get into details here. We'll watch a video on it. He was an Indian fighter. He fought against the Creeks and the Seminoles down south and in Florida. He was a man of the frontier. So he was not one of the Eastern established colonies. He was from the frontier. He was a politician in Tennessee, and he was most famously propelled to national glory as the hero of the last battle of the War of 1812 in New Orleans, in which the British were summarily, although in a way maybe unnecessarily, but at least informally, defeated. And that, again, really brought him to national prominence, his victory in that war. Okay. Here we go. Oh, sorry, I got my, now put my screen over here. Shrink that too. All right. So in 1828, Andrew Jackson is elected president of the United States. And one of his main claims to fame was that he was a man of the people. Again, one, he was a general, he was a soldier, he was from the Western territories, again, the Tennessee and Kentucky, and them being kind of Western at that point. He was considered a working man. He was popular with small businesses, farmers, small landowners known as yeomen or yeoman, however you want to say it. And he just had this idea as being kind of independently minded, a man of the frontier, a man of action, a man of the military, self-made. That there's a, although he was still very wealthy and those sorts of things, he had the belief in free men to govern themselves. The idea that each man controls his destiny, each man should be able to participate, each man, regardless of stature and background and education, is just as equal as any other man. This is a depiction of his um, inauguration, in which he famously invited all sorts of the unestablished, the unelites, the common men to the White House just to come over and greet him. And actually, it was so raucous that many things were destroyed and kind of turned into a bit of a mob event, too much to the shame or the horror of the more established Washington elites. uh, kind of summarizing Andrew Jackson's attitude, there's this famous moment where he goes in, he's visiting a church, and the pastor's preaching, and they kind of warn the preacher, a guy named Peter Cartwright, you need to tone it down a little bit. The president is here, Andrew Jackson's here. And Andrew Jackson, and the preacher famously says this quote. He goes, "Who's General Jackson? If he doesn't get his soul converted, then God will damn him as quickly as any other sinner." He didn't care who Andrew Jackson was. He just preached the gospel. And to Andrew Jackson's credit, later he saw this man in the street, and the pastor was a little nervous, wondering what would happen. In fact, Jackson was a famous dueler of anybody who disrespected his honor or his loved ones or his wife. But instead, Jackson went up and shook his hand and said, "I wouldn't have the gospel preached to me any other way. Give it to me straight." And so that kind of just is showing this who he admired and how others admired him as being this common man who didn't want to be treated, didn't expect anybody to be treated any other way. And again, really kind of representing this democratic spirit of equality. During his presidency, again, he took many actions that the common people saw him as fighting for them. He mistrusted big government. Here he's this political cartoon. He's fighting the many-headed leviathan or snake of the politicians and government power. He'd actually lost his first attempt at the presidency in what many people called the corrupt bargain, losing to John Quincy Adams because they actually was a close tie, and the House of Representatives had to pick the winner, and he felt that they had picked against him because there were some political favors being given in the back rooms. And so that to him, that just represented how corrupt general government was. So he wanted small government, he wanted local, state government. He challenged the Electoral College because he thought, no, it should just be more democratic, more in the hands of all the people. They had the National Bank, famously established by Alexander Hamilton that had been continually re-upped, re-registered after so many years. He famously refused to say we don't need a national bank, we don't want those, and he allowed it to expire. He vetoed its return. And he also just restricted infrastructure. So like big government building projects. He said, no, we're not going to spend money on that. We're not going to have these big tariffs or no, he rejected infrastructure, but he imposed tariffs in order to protect, the average American farmer. So he really saw himself as trying to help the common average American at the expense of, established traditions or the strength of the federal government. You just fly around. Here we go. Other people, his opponents, said, okay, he's not a man of the people. He's a man of the mob. He just kind of goes wherever the will of the uneducated, unformed, immoral people take him. They said, he's a man of violence who fought against the Indians. He fought illegal wars against Spain. What he famously did, Jackson, when he came into office, is he fired all of the Washington establishment. People have compared him to Donald Trump in a lot of ways, and there's some, with good reason. But he fires out all the Washington establishment from his cabinet and brings in personal friends or people with who helped him in his political career. These men weren't considered experts; they weren't considered prepared for their jobs, and they were mockingly called his kitchen cabinet. This is a political cartoon mocking their inability to behave in any civilized way. Not that that's what it actually was, but that's how they read it, because he got rid of these career government workers and just brought in his temporary supporters, which now is the norm. Every time a new president comes in, the heads of the agencies are removed and they bring in their own people. Jackson kind of began that trend, whereas before it was much more like Adams, where those people stayed in control and only the president and the elected officials changed. He viewed the presidency as the supreme power in government. So rather than three co-equal branch, legislature, judicial, and executive, he really sought to increase the power of the president. And he also famously accelerated and advocated for increasing the Indian removal policy. And that is, as America expanded west, removing Indians from their land out of the way of white settlers looking to move west and have the land for themselves to develop. Thomas Jefferson, although they were of the same party, was no fan of him. And he famously said, Andrew Jackson is one of the most unfit men I have known for the presidency. He has had very little respect for laws or constitution, though he is an able military chief. So he recognized his achievements in the Indian Wars and also, of course, in the War of 1812. But he feared that Andrew Jackson had no respect for the Constitution, again, no respect for the laws, that he was just going to that's why we call him King Andrew. He was going to just, it says on this cartoon, born to command. He's just going to do whatever he wants, and whatever the Constitution says, he doesn't really care. Laws are no of importance to him. He's just a practical man trying to make things happen. And to those who feared men becoming demagogues or men gaining too much power for themselves or running over the rights of others, that was a big fear. And we'll talk about that in our last point some more, which is majority rules. And that is kind of both the pros and the cons of this idea of democratization and all that Andrew Jackson came to represent. One positive aspect of this, though some might have not liked it, was that suffrage, which is the right to vote, began to expand during the early 1800s, where more and more people could vote. A lot of times we think, well, women and slaves couldn't vote at the beginning of the United States. No, there were a lot of restrictions. Some states required you to own land. Some states required you to pay poll taxes. If you were not born in the United States, but you were a naturalized citizen, you couldn't vote. You had to have, the certain age at which you could vote. All of those things were very strict at the start of the United States. And over time, they've slowly expanded and included more and more people. That's one example of democratization. And a lot of these qualifications and restrictions were abolished by states during this period. And we can see that in that the number of Americans who can vote rises from the beginning to being only 3% of all Americans or of the population could vote to around Jackson's time 15%, which you can see that's a massive increase and a direct example of what we're talking about here. Another aspect of this is Jackson's Indian removal policy. Again, as the U.S. expands, as things like the Lewis and Clark expedition map out and reveal all that is in Louisiana Purchase, white settlers, Americans want to move west. That means removing Native Americans who had fled the coast and the original 13 colonies and been kind of put into the Appalachian Mountains and beyond. But now they're going to need to be removed even further. And one of the things that Jackson failed to do in being in this more democratization or man of the people was he failed to protect the rights of these Native American minorities. Over 94 treaties with Native Americans were broken during this period, not all by Jackson, but many of them, because what did the majority want? Well, the majority of voting whites wanted more land. And that meant breaking treaties and removing Native Americans from where they thought, okay, we've made a deal with the white settlers. And, really a shameful act of betrayal in most instances. We have two major wars, a war with the Black Hawk in Illinois, and I think Abraham Lincoln famously fights in those, and then also the Seminole War down in Florida. So again, it's kind of a dark aspect of majority rules. What happens when the majority wants something that's at the expense of the minority? If you're just a man of the quote unquote people, are you going to, or a man of practicality, are you going to oppose that, or are you just going to, yeah, majority wins, too bad for the rest of you? The most famous or infamous example of this by Jackson is the Trail of Tears, in which the Cherokee, who were a Christian tribe, who were a tribe of farmers, they had written their own constitution, they had written their own alphabet, famously by a member of them, Sequoyah. They had done everything. They'd played by all the rules of white American society. And yet, even then, when it came time for some, I think it was down in Georgia, kind of South Carolina, North Carolina, they wanted some of their land. They thought that they'd found gold on it. When it came time to, they sued to kind of gain access to the land. And Jackson famously refused to protect them and authorized their removal to a reservation in Oklahoma. The Supreme Court actually favored with a white missionary who sued on behalf of the Cherokee to say, no, you promised these lands through treaty to them. You can't just, break your promise. And the Supreme Court said, you're right. Legally, the United States has no right to move the Cherokees. But when push came to shove, Jackson ignores the Supreme Court, and he, at gunpoint with the American army, they forced the march of the entire Cherokee Nation thousands of miles from again Georgia, North South Carolina region to Oklahoma. And they're poorly provisioned. It's through the winter. They don't have enough resources to make sure they have the needs for such an arduous journey. And over 4,000 of the Cherokee die en route. And it's a real national tragedy. The famous quote of all that, John Marshall, still on the Supreme Court, siding with the American missionary, saying, no, we have no right to move these Cherokee Indians. President Jackson says, John Marshall's made his decision. Now let him enforce it. So there was no expectation that the president had to listen to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court could rule, but they didn't have the power to force the president's hand. And Jackson, who did not agree with their order, he decided to let the white settlers have their way with Cherokee land. The final major issue within this growing tension between majority and minority and who would have the power and influence is something called the Missouri Compromise. And so as more and more territory becomes available, the big debate is, are these new lands going to be open or closed to slavery? The North, almost all states had abolished slavery. The South obviously had discovered cotton and were booming with more and more slave plantations than ever before. And so there was a real fear, well, if we let in more free states, then they're going to become the majority and they're going to revoke the rights of the slave states, or vice versa. Too many slave states imposing slavery upon the states that don't want slavery. And so anytime a new territory came up for joining the Union, there was a big debate over, well, how do we do this so that things remain in balance between slave and free states? And the policy was pretty much to allow one, always to make sure they get added in pairs so that no one side gained the majority and overpowered the other. Famous example of this in 1820 is the Missouri Compromise, in which, again, Maine was added as a free state and Missouri was added as a slave state. And then they sought to settle the crisis by drawing a line of latitude underneath Missouri, saying all territory south of this would be slave territories, all territory north of this would be free territories. And we'll track that process. We'll be talking about the Civil War in our next unit. But their first solution was this balancing of slave and free states, and then a geographic idea. Well, we'll just divide it geographically so that everything above is free, everything down is slave. And as we add them, we'll add them one for one so that one side gets the majority and overpowers the rights of the minority. A famous toast following the Missouri Compromise, you had Jackson, who was favoring a continued union, saying, "To our union, it must be preserved." In other words, northern and southern states. Representative John D. Calhoun, in favor of the slave states, said, "The Union," as a counter toast, "to the Union, next to our liberty, most dear." Basically, a shot across his bow, saying, yes, to the Union, but our liberty is most dear, comes first. Basically saying, if you federal government, if the Union ever tries to take slavery away from us, our freedom, our right to run our economy how we want to do it. Again, yes, there's a great irony and a hypocrisy there about freedom. But he's saying if they ever try to violate that, then maybe the Union will have to be dissolved. And that, of course, that is going to become the great national crisis following this era of good feelings. One other side note of this majority rules is in reaction to the process of democratization and the policies of Andrew Jackson, we get a new political party. The Federalists are basically destroyed following the War of 1812. They oppose the war with England. And when war breaks out, and of course America emerges victorious, the party that opposed it dissolves. There's just no more support for the Federalists. So countering the Democratic Party of Andrew Jackson is this party called the Whigs. They are named for anti-monarchists in Britain. They favor a mixed economy, not just a farming economy, but of manufacturings and city centers. They favor a strong federal government, similar to the Federalists, and that they should have fund internal improvements. They are opposed to territorial expansion because they know that as you add new land, one, you take it from someone else, you potentially continue to displace the Native Americans, and you continue to create a ever new crisis regarding slave state versus free states. They supported the rights of Indians or Native Americans, and they feared the growing power of the president as superior to the other two branches of governments. So kind of again, the political parties give you insights into the national tensions of the day. And so now we started out with Federalists and Democrats or Democratic Republicans. Now we have Democratic Republicans, the Federalists are gone, but we have the Whigs rising up to oppose them on these issues. All right, so what? Let's bring it to a close. Appreciate your attention. Democratization benefits. It shrank the size of the federal government. It cut spending. It cut debt. It cut the influence that this remote federal government had over the lives of people. So there was a general increase in liberty and self-government. There was growing suffrage or voting rights and representation for more and more of the American population. Growing access to public life. You didn't have to be from less of an expectation of a certain class or a certain school or a certain background in order to be involved in politics. More of this idea that, hey, maybe a reality TV star could be president someday, that idea. And so you get a higher diversity of candidates, a higher diversity of policies. You don't just have one segment of the culture dictating everything to the entire United States. There's more voices, there's more backgrounds, there's more perspectives in the pool. The costs, as we've talked about, there's kind of a more of an emphasis on party politics, factionalism, not what's good for the nation, but what's good for my party and how we believe things should be run. There's more of an abuse of power in order to enforce policies, this growing power of the presidency. Jackson just kind of running roughshod over constitutional norms in order to enact his policies. It would be one example of this. The idea that, again, I want to make something happen, so I'm going to bend the powers. Again, we saw Adams, and I wanted to emphasize Adams because he was so reticent to impose any sort of influence beyond what he felt the Constitution gave him. Well, that's gone, and that's disappearing with this democratization. There's more of, hey, I have the power, let me use it. There's lack of a protection under this idea for minorities. That, again, the majority rules. If lots of people get involved, but just because they want something doesn't mean it's going to be right or fair or even constitutional for, again, the Indians, the poor, or whoever lost the election. With this new group, there's also a little bit less, or with this increased access, less of a respect and awareness for the law. What does the Constitution actually say? What is the Electoral College? What does this amendment mean? What is the proper process for passing this law or this policy versus, hey, I want it done, let's get it done. I don't really care how it does. The ends justify the means. That can be satisfying in the short term, but that's very dangerous in the long term because you begin to destroy and erode all these constitutional protections for liberty. When you end up not, it's great when you have the power, and then one day when you don't have the power, your opponent has all the tools they need to destroy you. And finally, the emergence of demagoguery, that rather than a lot of political power based on merit or careful analysis of people's expertise and their skill set and their track record, there's more and more demagoguery, that the one with the personality, the one who can speak, the one who can attract the big crowds, the one who can inflame passions, they're the ones who are going to be more likely to be elected to office, the ones who can again garner the goodwill of the people or incite the mob, as some would view it. They're the ones who become rising power within American society, and seeing that as, again, a danger against measured constitutional government. Alrighty, there we go. We'll stop there, and we'll be talking about this process and looking more in detail at the War of 1812 and also Andrew Jackson. And I look forward to your thoughts and participation. See you soon in class.